The last talk in this workshop, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Amit Deshpande. Uh, Dr. Deshpande did his BSc from Chennai Mathematical Institute. He graduated in 2002 from there, and he did his PhD in MIT, which he graduated in 2007. And he joined Microsoft Research Bangalore in 2010. He's interested in theoretical computer science and machine learning. Today, he's going to talk to us about randomized algorithms for large matrix data. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you for inviting me to this workshop. Uh, I guess you have been through many talks, and this is the last talk. I will try to keep it simple. I won't bore you with proofs. Rather, I will tell you about exciting problems, the practical impacts that they have had. Uh, but they also have a nice mathematical or theoretical side to it. I will try to explain that. And at the same time, I will tell you that these are important problems. They have had practical impact in various fields, and in what ways they have had practical impacts. So I'm going to talk about randomized algorithms for large matrix data. So large data sets have become very common these days, and people want fast algorithms that that compute some interesting quantities on these large data sets. And typically, this data comes as either a stream of elements in this data, or sometimes the data is sort of distributed across servers, and if one wants to compute something interesting on this data collectively, then one wants algorithms that can handle the data as a stream, and also the data they can compute something called as the sketch of the data, so that if the data is distributed, the algorithm can compute its small sketch, and using low communication, it can in a way stitch these pieces together and compute something interesting that we wanted to compute on the original data. So I will tell you a little bit about large matrix data. We will start with small matrices though. I will tell you about like small matrix data that comes up in some applications, and the kind of things that we want to compute on this, especially something called as singular value decomposition. In some cases, a variant of it is also known as principal component analysis, and these are the most basic data analysis tools that are used everywhere. Then I will tell you a little bit about streaming data and what I mean by sketching algorithms, what kind of sketches people often compute. And another interesting area or topic is dimension reduction. So especially in case of matrix data sets, you can think of these as large matrices with some large number of rows and large number of columns. Or in other way, you can think of this as lots of points in high dimensions. So each row of the matrix, one can think of it as a point. So there are lots of points, and each point sits in a very high dimensional space because the number of coordinates or the number of features is really large. So in such cases, one would like to do something called as dimension reduction. So dimension reduction typically says that there is this data set of a large number of points in really high dimensional space, and we want to think of it as a data set. We want to approximate it using a data set that lies in a low dimensional space. But there is another way you can think about dimension reduction, that in some cases you may want to keep the dimension the same but reduce the number of points. One can also think of this as dimension reduction. It's similar to reducing, it's like reducing number of rows versus reducing number of columns. And I will tell you a little bit about row column sampling that is used for this version, where we want to reduce the number of rows or columns instead of reducing the dimension. Although as we go through all of these, you will see that these two are essentially the same things. And in the end, I will tell you about something called as a somewhat recent research that has come up, although not by me, but it's called as frequent direction. So typically in streaming data, there is a classical problem called heavy hitters or frequent items. So there is a stream of items that is coming, and you want to find the most frequent items in this stream, the top few most frequent items. And there is a variant of that that came up recently, and it's called as frequent directions algorithm. So it's the so you will see why this frequent directions or frequent items also fits in this sequence of things. So here is an example of places where you see matrix data. So the first example is microarray or gene expression data. So it's quite common to look at this microarray or gene expression data when people want to understand which genes are responsible for certain health conditions. And a lot of biological data where you can actually take DNA samples of lots of people and process these and create these things called as DNA microarrays or gene expression. In short, you can think of this as it's a matrix where, say, the rows represent the patients or individuals, the columns represent the genes. Genes are, in a way, simplistically speaking, these are basically patterns that are present in the DNAs. And you would like to know if a certain pattern, to what extent it is present in that DNA. And the entry in the matrix roughly represents the expression or the how much a certain gene is expressed in that sample. And one can create these kinds of matrices which are called as microarray. And experimentally getting this gene expression data has become, so the cost of that is reducing every day. And this data is available now, which is why people want to experiment with it. Then the other way in which matrix data comes up is in the context of document term matrices that people use to build what are called as topic models. So I will explain this. But you can think of this as there are lots of documents on the web, and terms you can think of these as, say, words. So for example, there are lots of documents, some related to politics, some related to sports, some related to entertainment. And there could be terms like, say, cricket, there could be terms like, say, Bollywood, there could be terms like, say, some political party, BJP or Congress, and those kinds of things. And one can create a document term matrix where basically think of this as one simplistic way to think of document term matrix as a large matrix where, say, the rows represent the terms and the columns represent the documents on the web. And the ijth entry tells you how many times term I appears in document J. Instead of the count, it could be something else. But the simplest way you can create document term matrices are when you have the entries basically count the number of times a term appears in a given document. And once you have lots of terms and lots of documents, say you have a vocabulary of words, and then there are these documents, one would like to analyze this matrix to, in a way, understand what kind of topics there are, or can we cluster the documents according to topics? Just looking at this huge matrix data, can we somehow cluster the documents which are about politics in one cluster, documents about sports in another cluster, and so on? So these are the things that people call as topic models. And if you have topic models, they help you do lots of tasks on this document term matrix much easy. They make these tasks much easier. The third example that I want to give is recommendation systems. So for example, there was this famous $1 million prize, Netflix prize, that caught a lot of, that caught attention of many people. A lot of people tried building algorithms to beat their algorithm. So this happened quite some time ago. Although one interesting thing that came up was that the early algorithms for recommendation systems, they are called as collaborative filtering algorithms. And some of the best algorithms on their leaderboard in the early stage, they were based on collaborative filtering, which looks at these the data that is available. So for example, in case of Netflix, it was users and movies data. So think of a matrix where the rows represent the users, the movies, the columns represent the movies, and each user has a rating for a movie. There was, it had this another extra issue that this matrix has a lot of missing entries. not every user rates all the movies, and not every movie is rated by all the users. So it has missing entries, but if you ignore that part for now, recommendation systems give rise to these kinds of matrices where you have users, you have objects or items, and you have ratings for these objects given by users. And you would like to basically, based on what a user has rated so far, you would like to recommend similar items, or based on the user's taste, you would like to recommend more items to this user. So that's where the recommendation system matrices come up. So this is how this microarray data looks like. So people, for example, take cells from healthy individuals as well as individuals having some certain health condition, and then one can actually get this DNA microarray data where you can think of it as, say, the rows represent the individuals, the columns represent the genes, and the ijth entry tells you how much a certain gene is expressed in the DNA sample of a certain person. And looking at this matrix, one would like to understand if certain subset of genes can explain this health condition. And synthesizing these microarrays has become much easier these days. Biologists routinely do this, and they get data which is like this. They have to stare at it, but then they have to do actually, these are large matrices, which is why one would like to do some data analysis on these. Now the thing is, in this talk, at least for the most part, or rather for almost the whole talk, I will be talking about something called as singular value decomposition. I will tell you what singular value decomposition means. But before that, I just want to tell you that these are not like cooked up problems. People have actually worked on like singular value decomposition for genome-wide expression data, and it has been useful. Like, this is a paper from the proceedings of National Academy of Sciences in the US, and there has been a lot of work. This is from 2000, so there has been a lot more work afterwards, like in the last 20 years or so. So people have used linear algebra to understand gene expression data. So here is, say, this document term matrix. Again, so for example, here in the gene expression data, the color coding was just to represent, you can think of it as some numbers between 0 and 1, but you could also think of these as, or real numbers, but you could also think of this as like some color coded pattern that you can observe in a matrix. So similarly, like for document term matrix, you can have, say, documents on the as columns, terms as your rows, and each entry represents how many times a certain term appears in a certain document. Or there could be some other way of telling you how much a certain term is relevant to a certain document. And based on these, you would like to process this matrix in some way so that, say, the terms which are, so for example, so this is the same matrix, but if you rearrange the rows and the columns, you would get the same matrix to look like this matrix, which has this block diagonal kind of structure. There are also some entries here, but if you ignore those, it has this block diagonal structure. And if you look at the terms, for example, these terms are air, pollution, power, environmental. Then there is some illegal immigration, amnesty, aliens, that comes in one cluster. Then there is shuttle, space, launch, booster in another cluster. So one can just look at the matrix and do some sort of linear algebra based data analysis of it, and that can help cluster these articles and the terms according to topics. So by doing this, sometimes we don't have to know what the topics are to do this. Even without knowing the topics, one can actually do this kind of a clustering and then look at the cluster to see what topic it represents. Okay. And as I mentioned, in recommendation systems, there are n users, there are d movies, you would get an n by d matrix of ratings. And a simple technique is called as collaborative filtering, which tries to look at this matrix and write it as some u times v transpose, where u is n by k matrix and v is d by k matrix, where k is much smaller than n and d. Say the number of users is in tens of thousands. Movies could also be in thousands. But the k is very small. And think of k as something that represents, say, for example, for users, it would mean basically users with similar interests. And for movies, it would mean movies of the same genre. So by doing this kind of a decomposition of the matrix, one can actually understand, say, users who have similar tastes and movies that fall in the same genre. So typically when one goes to recommendation systems, so the gene expression data is not small, but if you look at the topic models data or say the recommendation systems data, then the data is really big. Like it can have millions of rows or and billions of entries overall. So processing this data is a challenge because you can't process it in the memory of your computer. So either it is distributed, in some cases it also comes as a stream. And these are the three V's of big data. It has large volume, it has large variety, and it has large velocity. The velocity represents basically the streaming nature of it. And some of the key questions that people have looked at are, can we simplify the input, especially if it is a matrix, by reducing the dimension? Or can we pick a small representative subsample or sketch of the input? So here, think of this sketch as basically picking a subset of rows or columns. For example, in the gene expression data, just doing a decomposition may not help. You would want this decomposition to be somewhat meaningful in the sense that it should also tell that a certain subset of genes are responsible for a certain health condition. And the algorithmic challenge is often that can we do this dimension reduction or this subset selection, which is doing the sketch efficiently and on the fly. On the fly means like if the data is coming as a stream, can you do it very efficiently? When you get, for example, say the rows of the matrix one by one. And then the question that is important to study these problems from a theoretical side is, can we give provable guarantees about the final approximation? So for example, we want to compute something using this matrix data by reducing its dimension or by picking a subsample. If we reduce this data to a smaller looking matrix, and if we compute something using this smaller looking matrix, are we getting a good approximation to the thing that we wanted to compute in the first place, like on the original data? So the simplest thing that people want to compute is this singular value decomposition. So I will tell you a little bit about what singular value decomposition means algebraically and also say geometrically. And then we will look at some of the ideas that have come up in the context of computing singular value decomposition or the top few components in the singular value decomposition in an efficient way or in a streaming way, or when one wants to sort of tie this singular value decomposition to some subset of rows and subset of columns, and then what happens, and what are the algorithmic techniques that have come up in, say, the last 20 years or so. So given any n by d, at least in this talk we will look at real valued matrices. So given any n by d real valued matrix, we want to write it as u times sigma times v transpose, where u is an n by r matrix, where the columns of u are orthonormal. So for example, let me just write it like this. There is some large matrix. We want to but the large matrix, typically think of this as in large data, what happens is often the large data is of low rank or is close to being low rank. So the low rankness comes from the structure, and the noise is what makes its rank large. So typically, low rankness of a matrix or being close to low rank is sort of a sign that the data has a lot of structure. So for now, let's assume that this matrix itself is of low rank. So then the singular value decomposition basically writes this down as a product of three matrices, where this sigma is a diagonal matrix R by R. This U is N by R, A is say N by D, and this is R by D. Think of both N and D as large, or think of both of them as roughly equal. Say this matrix is huge, the number of rows and columns both are large, but it is close to being low rank. For now, let's say it's exactly low rank. Close to being low rank would mean that we want to sort of do this decomposition. So if it is exactly low rank, we would like to write it like this. U sigma V transpose, where the R columns of U, they are orthonormal. That is, all of these are unit vectors and they are orthogonal to each other. Their dot products are 0 for any two different columns. Similarly, the rows of V transpose, they are orthonormal. And sigma is a matrix that is diagonal matrix, with the diagonal entries being little sigma 1, sigma 2, up to sigma R. So singular value decomposition means writing a matrix in this form. And any real valued matrix can be written in this form. And another way to look at it is we can, so where R is the rank of this matrix A. And another way to think about this is A can be written as sum of R rank 1 component. Each component is given by some sigma I times Ui times Vi transpose. So basically a column of U times scalar here times the row of V transpose. So geometrically what this means is that you can think of, so this matrix can always be thought of as, okay, in that picture it's M instead of A, but this matrix actually, when you multiply it with a d-dimensional vector, so it acts on this d-dimensional space. And if you look at what it does to all the vectors, to understand what it does to all the vectors, it's sufficient to look at only, say, what it does to unit vectors, what it does to, say, the unit ball. And it turns out that what it geometrically does to a unit ball can be thought of as it maps this unit ball to an ellipsoid. But the coordinate axis of the ellipsoid could be in some weird direction. It may not be along the coordinate direction. So this decomposition, the singular value decomposition, can be thought of as breaking this map into a composition of three maps, where the V transpose actually, it's a unitary transformation that only rotates the ball in d dimensions, the unit ball in d dimensions. Then sigma is the transformation that uses the diagonal elements to scale the coordinate axis of this ball in different directions. And U is another transformation that again rotates this ellipsoid to align the axis with the axis that you would get if you just multiply by that original matrix. So as I said, the singular value decomposition geometrically means this. One way to, a natural question then is, suppose the matrix is not low rank, it's close to being low rank. Then the question is, can we approximate it using a low rank matrix? And in many cases, we have a certain low rank in mind as basically the target, and we want to find a low rank approximation of that rank. And so given a matrix, we want to find a rank K matrix that is closest to it. So given a matrix A, we want to find a rank K matrix, say AK, that is closest to the given matrix. Now we would need some measure to determine how close two matrices are. One natural notion of distance between two matrices is Frobenius norm or Hilbert-Schmidt norm. So the squared Frobenius norm is basically the sum of squares of the entry-wise difference of two matrices. Or in other words, think of these matrices as like long vectors. It's instead of thinking of it as n by d matrix, think of it as a vector with nd entries, and we are looking at just the usual squared Euclidean distance between two matrices. And another notion that is useful in to study distance between matrices is L2 norm. This operator norm, sorry, not L2. The operator norm or spectral norm, which is basically the maximum over unit vectors, how much this, so for example, how much a unit vector gets scaled up by when you multiply by this A minus B. So one can define this for any matrix, and therefore one can also use it to measure how large the difference is. There are also other notions like LP-Schatten norm. Come again. Less than or equal to. Yes. Equal to would also be fine. Or you could also define it as this ratio, this divided by norm of V. So now let's go back to this geometry of low rank approximation. So if we wanted to look at any of these notions, for example, let's say Frobenius norm notion, and we want to find, given a matrix A, we want to find a rank K approximation that is closest to A in squared Frobenius norm. What does that correspond to geometrically is that, let's say the rows of A are A1, A2, An. What we want is a matrix B of rank K. The best such matrix we will represent it by AK. But for now, we are optimizing over all rank K matrix. Take any matrix of rank K, let's say B. The rows of B, B1, B2, Bn, they basically form some K-dimensional linear subspace in D-dimensional space, D-dimensional Euclidean space. So rank of B is K just means that the rows of B lie in a low-dimensional linear subspace. Let's look at the special case K equals 1. That means this subspace is given by just a span of one unit vector. So there are these points A1, A2, An in D-dimensional space. Origin, and what we want is we want to find a line such that we want to minimize, so we want points B1, B2, Bn on this line such that the squared Frobenius norm, one can actually break it up, since it is sum of squares of the entry-wise differences. One could also collect the coordinate terms together to think of it as sum of squares, squared norms of AI minus BI. So in that case, it's clear that this BI has to be a projection of A. So if this direction is given by V, for each AI, the corresponding BI must be its projection, which is onto this direction V, which would be represented by the dot product of AI with V in that direction V. So going that much distance in this direction V. So the squared Frobenius norm error, so the squared Frobenius norm error in this case will be the sum of, so this will be the BI, and the squared Frobenius norm error is basically this, and we are adding up the sum of squared distances of all the points to this subspace. In other words, so using Pythagoras, we can actually write it as this squared distance is basically the squared norm of AI minus the squared projection, which is just this. Oh, sorry, there is a square missing here. The squared norm of AI sum minus the sum of squared projections. So in other words, at least in this special case where k equals 1, what we want is we want a unit vector that maximizes this quantity, because the sum of squared lengths of AIs, that's fixed. That doesn't depend on V. So in other words, what we want is we want to maximize the squared norm of A times V. Or in other words, it's basically maximizing B transpose A transpose AB, which is this over unit vector. So actually it turns out that V is nothing but the top eigenvector of this matrix A transpose A. And if you do this for larger k, you would get that you would get V1, V2, Vk successively, which are orthonormal. And what happens is that the best rank k approximation, AK are just the projections of AIs onto the span of these V1, V2, Vk. And these V1, V2, Vk, they are the top k eigenvectors of A transpose. Sorry, this here it got flipped. So V1, V2, Vk, they are the top eigenvectors of A transpose A. Similarly, you would also get that the way SVD is related to this geometric picture is that the VIs are nothing but eigenvectors of A transpose A. UIs are eigenvectors of A transpose. Here it has got flipped. And the thing is, the first few vectors that you get, they correspond to the largest eigenvalues of A transpose A, and the eigenvalues of A transpose A and A transpose, they are the same. So it also gives that the squared Frobenius norm of A is just the sum of squares of all the singular values. And if you want the error for the rank k approximation, it's the tail of the squared singular values going from k plus 1 onwards. So AK is formed by the top k components in the singular value decomposition. And singular value, where these UIs and VIs, they are the top eigenvectors of AA transpose and A transpose A, respectively. And the sigma I squared is the corresponding eigenvalue for both of them for this matrix. So when you take the square root, that comes in this AK. And one can actually show, if you do this rigorously, you can show that this is the best rank k approximation to A in the Frobenius norm. This is the matrix that minimizes the squared Frobenius norm error while being rank k. And if you do it all the way up to the rank of A, then you would get the entire singular value decomposition. Now, this one can think of this as basically a dimension reduction. If you are doing this for dimension k, all that we are doing is we are taking this data which lives, which are n points in d dimension. We are projecting this data in a k dimensional subspace while not losing much. Where not losing much means that the sum of squared distances of all the points to this subspace is minimized. We have retained basically all the information. If you think of information as the squared length, we have retained as much as possible. Now the thing is, this is what is known as folklore. Now algorithmically, what are the new things that came up? The new things that came up are SVD, for example. To compute this subspace, you need to know the matrix. Can one get a subspace that preserves, say, the lengths of the points or pairwise distances between the points, where the subspace does not even depend on the matrix or the data? Can that happen? So there is this random projection technique, or it's also known as the Johnson-Lindenstrauss lemma, which says that if you have n points in d dimensions, think of n and d as both large, you can take a random projection. So there are two ways to think about it. You can either think of it as you can pick a log n over epsilon squared dimensional random linear subspace. And for that, one needs to sort of define a measure over all the subspaces of a certain dimension. But the other way to think about it is basically all that we do is we take a random matrix and multiply all the points using this random matrix. So there are points a1, a2, an, and all that we do is we multiply each point with a random matrix R. The entries of R are just Gaussians, IID or IID standard normal variables. They could also be IID plus minus ones with half of probability, appropriately scaled with some scaling factor. And it has this property, one can show that all the squared lengths for all the points, they will be preserved within 1 plus minus epsilon. One can also do this for pairwise differences also. Just that if you want to think of pairwise differences, there will be n choose 2 such points instead of n points. But the log of n choose 2 would still be some constant times log n, which means that you can actually, if log n is much smaller, say n and d, think of them as both roughly equal. What it says is that you can project all this data into something like log n dimensional space, which is much smaller, while preserving the squared lengths of all the points, also preserving all the pairwise distances with high probability. So random projection gives a technique which is data agnostic or data oblivious. It does not depend on this random projection, does not depend on your data. You can just take a random matrix, hit your data with this random matrix. You have now this data living in log n dimensions or some constant times log n dimensions. This is one technique that has been used a lot in especially these streaming and sketching algorithms. There are a lot of quantities that interesting things that you would like to compute on A. You can show that instead, if you hit it with a random matrix, reduce its dimension, and compute it on R times A, you would not be very far off. So the key difference between these two is that one is random projection is data agnostic, SVD is data dependent. Random projection preserves, say in this, if you look at Johnson-Lindenstrauss lemma, it preserves the squared lengths of all the rows, whereas SVD preserves the sum of squared lengths in some sense. It tries to make sure that the sum of squared projections is maximized on this subspace. So there are results known for, so this result is known for a variety of distributions, like distributions that satisfy certain properties. For them, one can show this kind of a property. Yes. Okay, so good question. Let me answer it in two different ways. So one is people have studied what are the distributions that one can use in the entries of R so that the squared L2 length is preserved. People have also looked at this other question where instead of the usual L2 length, you look at some other LP, L1 norm or some other norm. What are the families of matrices that one needs for, say, preserving the L1 norm of point? So those have been looked at. Like there are known results about that. So one thing that this random projection does is that it gives a projection into a random subspace. That subspace has no meaning in terms of the points or the dimensions. So if you had, say, things like, say, the document term matrix, or if your rows had special meaning, if the columns had special meaning, say, for example, in the gene expression data, this subspace will say that here is a subspace that contains most of the information. You can project your data into this subspace, but it won't tell you things like it is given by a subset of, or it sort of corresponds to a subset of genes. It will not tell you that it corresponds to a subset of coordinates or a subset of examples. So which is why one would like to look at, say, a subset of rows or columns which approximate the SVD subspace or other subspaces, even the one given by random projection. But one would like results which say that one can approximate there is a subspace. SVD says that there is a subspace which minimizes the sum of squared distances of all the points to this subspace. Now the question is, can this subspace be approximately realized as a span of some of the points itself, some subset of points? So for example, if the matrix is exactly of rank k, we know that there exists a subset of k rows which span all the other rows. Is there a soft version of this theorem where if the matrix is close to being rank k, can we say that there exists a small subset of some constant times k rows which almost span all the other rows? Where almost span would mean that, say, the rank k approximation error, the optimal error is, say, some alpha. Is there a good approximation to that obtained when instead of using the best rank k approximation, we use a span of some small subset of rows? And here, Fries, Kandan, and Vempala, they showed using a very simple idea called a squared length sampling, that you pick rows of the matrix with probability proportional to their squared length. And if you pick, say, k over epsilon, if you pick an IID sample of k over epsilon rows of this matrix, and if you look at their span, the projecting onto that span is reducing the dimension from d to k over epsilon. K is typically much smaller than n and d. Even k over epsilon is much smaller than n and d in many of these cases, where epsilon is, say, some 0.1, n and d are in millions or billions, k is something like 10. We are only interested in the top 10 principal components, and epsilon is some small error parameter that we are willing to tolerate. Can we get results where we can say that the SVD subspace is approximated by some subset of rows or columns? In this case, let's say rows. So what they showed is that there exists such a subset such that if you use its span, then you get a good approximation to what you would get if you had used the best k-dimensional subspace, which gives the best rank k approximation. And the error would be epsilon times the squared Frobenius norm of A. Intuitively, it's sort of saying that the longer the rows are, the higher they are paying for the squared distance to a span, squared distance to a subspace. So for example, if you perturb this subspace a little bit, the farther away, the points that are farther away from the origin, their cost that they pay in terms of squared distance to the subspace will change by larger amount. So the squared length sampling actually gave a 2-pass streaming algorithm, because you can actually do this sampling in a streaming way. And its running time is faster than what you would get if you were to do, say, singular value decomposition and compute AK using, by doing, say, singular value decomposition of A directly. So instead of doing it directly on A, we pick a subset of rows, we project this matrix on this subset. Now it's a much smaller matrix. Instead of n by d, it would be like n by k over epsilon. And we do SVD on this, and that itself gives you a good approximation. Oh, so it just says that define a distribution on all the rows, where the probability of picking each row ai is squared length of ai divided by sum of the squared lengths of all the rows. So the probability of picking ith row is equal to this. So projection just means similar to this. Instead of, so we use span of the sample that we have picked as a subspace. We project every point onto this subspace. And now we can implicitly think of it. If we have the basis for this subspace, we can implicitly think of now our data as living in k over epsilon dimensions. So it's now can be thought of as, if we have, so it's a k over epsilon dimensional subspace in d dimensions. If we have a basis for that, basically we would have to maintain only a k over epsilon by d matrix to maintain its basis. And once we have this basis, the projection of all the rows onto this span can be thought of as just an n by k over epsilon sized matrix. Yes. Yes, yes. Yes, yes, but the thing is, to compute SVD, the SVD computation is much more costly. Like, it's much more expensive. This is just a sampling technique that speeds it up. So, for example, you can compute the projection in nd k over epsilon time. So, typically, if you had to compute the SVD, your running time would be nd squared or n squared d, whatever minimum of these. Think of both n and d as large. The running time would be nd squared. Whereas if you do this projection, your running time would be nd k over epsilon times the time it takes to compute the SVD of this smaller matrix, which would be like n times k over epsilon squared. But if n and d are large, this would be the dominant term. N and d are much larger than k over epsilon. This nd k over epsilon would be much smaller. This would be the dominant term, and it would be much smaller than nd squared. So one thing that it does not capture is, if say there are lots of points that are in one particular direction, and then there are some other points which are in an orthogonal direction. If you do squared length sampling, you would pick one direction, but you would, even if you take a large sample, you would miss this other direction. So there is a variant of squared length sampling which does better. It's called adaptive sampling, which what it does is, you pick a sample using squared length sampling. Now you project your data orthogonal to the span of this sample, and you again repeat. That is, you project everything orthogonal to the span of this sample, and now you again do squared length sampling on these on this reduced whatever projected data. But another thing that came up is called volume sampling. And later we realized that it was known in math, and it has been used as like it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting distribution that comes up in many other problems. And in probability, it's known as determinantal measures. If you are interested, you can look at this survey by Lyons. Russell Lyons. What it does, what volume sampling or determinantal measures, especially in this context, what they do is, they think of a generalization of squared length sampling, where instead of picking rows one by one, you just pick a subset at once. And the subset is picked with probability proportional to, so let me draw it like this. There is this matrix A. So there is this matrix A. Squared length sampling said that you pick rows of A with probability proportional to squared lengths. Now we want to say that you pick a subset of A. For now, let me think of this as like a contiguous subset. It need not be. You can pick one row here, one row here, one row here. But for just so that we can draw a picture, let's think of it as, we want to pick this subset of, say, k rows. We could also do this for some small number t, or whatever this. Let's represent it by size of s. These many rows. We want to pick this, AS, or basically AS is the same as like picking that subset, proportional to determinant of AS transpose. So AS transpose is basically size of S by size of S matrix. What it represents is the following. If you take the rows in this subset, if you look at them geometrically, they would form a parallelepiped. So you can define a parallelepiped using them. And this is basically the squared up to some constant factor. It is, and that constant factor is the same for all subsets of the same size. Up to that constant factor, this is just the squared volume of the parallelepiped. So in the special case when k equals 1, we are just picking say one row. There it would be the squared length sampling. But if we want to do this for larger number of rows, say for 2 rows, it means we will pick 2 rows with probability proportional to the area of the parallelogram, the squared area of the parallelogram that they form. And one can also generalize this to subsets of all sizes. So one can even take this as a distribution on all 2 to the n subsets. It's basically a distribution on 2 to the n subsets of 1 to n. If we restrict to subsets of a certain size, we would only get distribution over subsets of a certain size. But one can also look at other restrictions. But in case of low rank approximation, what is interesting is only restricting this distribution to subsets of a certain size. And one can show that so one interesting thing that it does is squared length sampling could have missed these orthogonal directions. If you do it this way, it does not miss those. And if you pick a sample of k over epsilon rows of A, according to this distribution, you can show that with high probability, you will get a 1 plus epsilon multiplicative guarantee compared to the rank k approximation error. You would not have to suffer this extra additive epsilon times squared Frobenius norm of A, which can be large if the entries of A are large. So it gives this multiplicative guarantee, but you might ask, why is this distribution interesting? Can we sample from this efficiently? This looks like it's supported on like exponentially many subsets. Even if it is say on n choose k subsets of size, say k over epsilon, that would look like n to the k over epsilon, roughly the number of subsets of that size. So turns out that no, we can actually sample from this efficiently. And the reason why, so for example, one way to think about it is look at this question that this is a distribution on all 2 to the n subsets of 1 to n. Okay. For now, let's say we don't fix the size. This is on all 2 to the n subsets. What we are given is we are given A, or we are given, let's say, the AA transpose. So this AS transpose is basically a submatrix of AA transpose. It's a principal, so this would be a principal submatrix, and its determinant would be a principal minor of this AA transpose, which is n by n. So in this n by n matrix, we look at a subset. We look at the same subset for rows and columns. We look at that submatrix, look at its determinant, and that's what this is. And can we sample subsets with this probability distribution? Turns out that this is a nice, linear algebraically nice quantity. One can actually compute the partition function, that is the normalizing constant for this distribution. For squared length distribution, the normalizing constant was just the sum of squared lengths of all the points. Here, for example, it would be the normalizing constant, or the partition function would be sum over all subsets, determinant AS transpose. Or if we were to look at subsets of a certain size, say a fixed size of S is say some P, it would be this quantity. Turns out that this quantity comes up naturally. If you look at the characteristic polynomial of AA transpose, there are 2 ways to look at it. Either we know that the eigenvalues of AA transpose are by definition sigma 1 squared, sigma 2 squared up to sigma n squared. so the coefficients, we know one way to write is that we know that the coefficients are, this coefficient is the sum of all the roots. So we know the coefficients of the polynomial in terms of its roots. But since this is a characteristic polynomial of A transpose, we also know that this term which comes after the highest degree term up to sign, it's actually the trace of the matrix. The last term, the constant term, up to sign, it's actually the determinant of the matrix. And all the in between terms, they are basically given by these expressions. So if you know the characteristic polynomial, you actually know these quantities. And the characteristic polynomial, being a determinant, can be computed very efficiently. And therefore, all these coefficients can also be computed very efficiently. And that is the reason, actually, in short, that is the reason why its partition function can be computed, even marginals can also be computed. And that gives rise to a fast algorithm. So even though this distribution is on 2 to the n subsets, if we were to exactly sample from this distribution, we can do it in polynomial in n time. So so in a realistic, yes, so in a realistic application, you would not know this exactly, but you can do certain tricks. Like for example, you can do volume sampling approximately. So there are ways to do volume sampling approximately. So ideally, so the final result actually that we had, the algorithmic result that we had, it has to use volume sampling approximately instead of doing this exactly. Doing this exactly would give you interesting, so typically you would like to do it in two ways. First of all, you would like to prove an existence result, that there is a quantity that you want to compute, there is something that you want to compute using the whole matrix, and there exists a way to reduce the dimension or reduce the number of rows or columns such that you can also do it on this reduced matrix. So just to show existence results, sometimes these techniques are useful. Once you know its existence, you can actually throw a lot more algorithmic tools at that problem. So here are a few recommended readings. Like later it was also shown using, say, this random sketch, where we can actually do a random, you can hit the matrix using a random matrix, like the random matrix in Johnson-Linden-Strauss lemma. There is also this survey by Halko, Martinson, and Trop, and there is a monograph by Woodruff that you should look at. Now the thing is, these sampling techniques or even the multiplication by a random matrix, you might think of these as like just probabilistic, something that mathematicians like to play with. But turns out that they have actually had impact on the way SVD is computed on large matrices. If you look at all the, say, code that is used in, say, MapReduce, like Apache Mahout has a stochastic SVD, all the packages that are used for computing SVD on large matrices, they are all randomized or stochastic SVDs. So on very large matrices, nobody actually tries to compute SVD the way it was traditionally computed. People actually either try to use some sort of a row or column sampling, or they do some sort of random sketching. Now I want to tell you a little bit about this frequent items and frequent directions. So if you think of these, if you look at this picture of, say, the singular vectors and the top few components, they are sort of the most important directions for the data. These are the directions along which the squared projection, if you project your entire data, that is, take the sum of squared projections of all the points, then that is maximized for the top few components. So in a sense, those are the most important directions. So there is a similar thing that you would do for, say, items. Although these two problems were disconnected until something like 6 years ago, when Edo Liberty observed that one could use techniques from these heavy hitters or frequent items to also compute sketches of matrices in a deterministic way without actually resorting to the randomized techniques. Sometimes, in some cases, deterministic algorithms are better than randomized. So this is a classical problem called as frequent items or heavy hitters. So there is a stream of n items coming from 1 to up to m. And the problem is to find the most frequent k items using few counters, like very few counters. So if you had m counters, you could have maintained counters for all these m distinct items. So all that this means is that, just to write it, you get a stream of numbers from 1 to m. So 1 to let's say 100. You get numbers 1, 10, maybe 39, again you get 12, maybe again you get 10, again 1, then again 2, whatever. And you would get n such numbers. And at the end of this task, what you have to do is you have to find the most frequent k items. But you can't use m counters, m is too large. So k is much smaller. K is much smaller than n and m. The counters that we can use can be proportional to k, but not dependent on n and m. And we still want to find the most frequent k items. So there is this old algorithm due to Mishra and Grease from 82. What it does is something very clever. It keeps something like k over epsilon counters. So for each new element, you would keep a counter. As you see it again and again, you would increment the counter. Now, suppose you are keeping, so there is some constant, let's say the constant is just 1. So you have exactly k over epsilon counters. Suppose the first time you see k over epsilon plus 1 distinct elements, now you don't have a counter to keep for this new element. What do? You look at the median frequency among the counts that you have had so far, and you zero out all the counters that have frequencies below that. So half of the counters are again available. Now you can allocate these counters to these new items, and you keep on repeating this till the end. And what you get is that you would keep all these k over epsilon counters, and the top k among them would actually, their counts would be additive epsilon n approximation to the true top k most frequent items, their counts. So it's a very clever algorithm. I won't tell you the analysis if we are already out of time, but I just wanted to mention this because in the context of SVD, these are the most important directions. And Liberty took this liberty to understand that this can be done for even directions. So frequent directions, that's what he came up with. And frequent directions, what it does is it actually looks at, now what you get are rows instead of these numbers. What you get are d-dimensional vectors, a1, a2, whatever. You are getting this matrix as a stream of rows. Each row is basically a d-dimensional vector. So one wants to update this frequent items algorithm for vectors. How would one do that? Again, the same idea or a similar idea. You keep a k over epsilon by d matrix. So it has k over epsilon rows and d dimensions. So as you get the first k over epsilon rows, you just fill them as first k over epsilon points, you just fill them as rows of this matrix. Now you are out of space. What do? You just compute the SVD of this matrix. So SVD of this matrix would have some k over epsilon components. You throw away the bottom half of the components. So basically, if you look at this matrix, if you look at the SVD, you can think of the SVD as scaled version of, only look at, say, the right singular vectors. Instead of these u1, v1, only look at, say, the v1s, because their span is what is more important. So only keep the top half of these scaled according to their singular value and zero out the bottom half. Do the SVD and zero out the bottom half. Now when you get a new row, just fill it in. Keep on filling. When you run out of space, again compute an SVD, throw out the bottom half. Only keep the scaled singular vectors, but only the top half of them, throw out the bottom half. And what Liberty could show, and this was a KDD best paper in 2013, that you get this additive error similar to what one would get in Fries-Kandon-Mampala, but using a deterministic algorithm. And it also has this, it ties this problem to a classical heavy hitters or frequent items problem that has been studied for a long time. And later it was improved to actually a multiplicative. You are always living in this. So the goal is basically, in the end, whatever k over epsilon dimensional space that you have, or if you take its top k SVD components, that subspace should give a good approximation to the top k SVD subspace of the entire data. So one actually gets these multiplicative guarantees. So I will stop here. I just wanted to give these different perspectives to on the same problem and their algorithmic applications. Thank you.
To approximate a matrix while preserving some structure, like suppose it's adjacency matrix and you want a simpler adjacency matrix. Are there techniques for that? And this is just one case, but some other structure which you want to retain.
What does
and the matrix has some in some subclass of matrices. You want to the approximation should have the same property.
So people have looked at matrices coming from graphs, where one wants to say that there is a graph, and it's a dense graph, and one wants to look at a sparsification of it, so that the resulting matrix would not be low dimensional, but it would be sparse, while having the same eigenvalues of the Laplacian or the same values. If you take any cut in the graph, the cut value, that is the number of weighted edges that go across this cut, that would be roughly preserved within 1 plus minus epsilon. So that has been looked. So that's a graph sparsification. I haven't seen the low rankness angle in graphs, because when the matrices are like they are related to graphs, people actually want sort of structure in the context of this edges, like sparsity, edge sparsity, or some other. Although people have also done these kinds of things for community detection, like planted. So there are these problems called as planted cliques or planted communities, or stochastic block models, where actually this matrix is it is promised that it comes from some sort of a block model where certain components have high values. So there are it comes from a graph where vertices in the same cluster, they are highly likely to have an edge. Vertices in different clusters, they are less likely to have an edge. And you want to recover this cluster. All that you are given is this adjacency matrix, and you want to recover these clusters. So that has some low rankness structure. So that is sort of similar to what one would do using low rank approximation or some variants of it, like non-negative matrix factorization.
The technique that you're using is very similar to finding eigenvalues using Langshaw's techniques. And
yes.
You seem to be using rows.
Yes.
So what if you use columns, or
yes.
A comparison of, an alternation of the two?
Yes. So for SVD, if you only want the top k components, typically the algorithms, before the stochastic SVD techniques kicked in, the best algorithm was Langshaw's. Okay. So this is slightly different, at least the sampling part of it, because Langshaw's doesn't do sampling. Although the guarantees for Langshaw's, they typically, if you want, say, provable guarantees, they depend on, so at least most of the algorithms that I have seen in numerical linear algebra, they need this gap between singular values. So the guarantees are always in terms of these gaps between singular values. They are not absolute guarantees. But that's the only difference.
A bit of a philosophical, but the question is now here, this is probably more an analysis kind of thing. So you have data and you want to find out its low rank approximation. and I'm looking at it as an analysis philosophy. So is there also a design philosophy associated? You know, so you have a low rank thing in mind and you design data which has that low rank, if you know what I mean.
Yes, so that
Is this a meaningful question? First, I don't know.
So-
I mean, I'm,
from the top of my head, I can't think of like formulations at least of related problems which would fall in that. But the question makes sense. I just don't know of like formulations which would fall in as design question.
Okay, so any other questions? So if there are no other questions, can I invite Professor Borkar to please give Dr. Deshpande a token of our appreciation? And
Thank you.